Okay, I want to talk about something that's probably one of the most important subjects of plastering, something that sometimes we can take for granted. This is a problem that all plasterers have to deal with. This is a theoretical situation. We've got lots of different backgrounds. We've got hard wall in this corner, we've got patches of bonding here, this wall on top is just a painted wall, we've got a bit of plaster board in the bottom left corner, and we've got a bit of area where the plasters come back to the undercoat. Now, what we have is five different backgrounds, and each one of them has a different rate of suction. Now, what does that mean? We've been through this before, but it basically means how fast the background's going to pull the moisture from the plaster. So in terms of suction, how fast anything with a moisture content is going to be drawn back from it. And what does that mean for plaster? It basically means the higher the rate of suction, the faster the plaster is going to dry and essentially set, which to us is not what we want. We need to make sure that with these five backgrounds, they're all going to set at the same time. Now, this is a problem that all plasterers have to deal with, and I'm going to give you a simple solution. Now, the problem is with PVA. Each of these different areas need to be controlled with different levels of PVA. So if it's a painted wall, if you've just got a painted wall, you'll get away with one thick coat of PVA. That'll do it. Once it's dried, you can start plastering. It's not going to pull too much moisture from the plaster because the suction rate isn't as strong. Now, when we start getting to the other sections, undercoat plaster and bonding, these have got a fairly high degree rate of suction, which means they're going to pull the moisture a bit more than the painted surface from the plaster, which essentially means we want to be putting a few more coats of PVA on these areas. What I like to do with bonding and undercoat plaster is probably put 2 good coats of PVA on these areas, and that should sufficiently kill the suction. And when it's still damp, when the PVA is still a bit tacky, that's when you hit it and start plastering the walls. Other end of the spectrum, we've got Plaster Board. This has probably got the lowest rate of suction out of everything that you'll use. Plaster Board doesn't really need any preparation other than scrim tapes on your joints. It doesn't need any PVA, it doesn't need any killers, it doesn't need any sealers, and that's because it's not going to pull any moisture from the plaster, and it'll set in a nice traditional sense, giving you the maximum amount of time, which is exactly what we want. Here's the worst case scenario when you are plastering. Hardwall plaster has got the highest rate of suction. That and sand cement is really going to pull the moisture out of your plaster. Hardwall is used when you're doing work to brickwork. So if you have a brick wall and you want to float it, as in float and set, which is basically where you plaster a wall from scratch. So you've got 12 to 15 mil of hardwall plaster, 3 millimeters of finish on top. This has got the highest rate of suction, and ideally, if you are doing hardwalling, you want to put the hardwall on the wall in the morning, plaster it on top in the afternoon. But even then, it can still pull a lot of the moisture out of the plaster. So like I was saying, this got the highest rate of suction. If I was dealing with this with PVA, I'd be looking at about 3 strong coats, sometimes even more, depending on how long you've left it. The longer you leave hardwall to dry, the higher the rate of suction is going to go. Now, if you were to plaster it the same day, you literally just put it on in the morning, put your plaster on top and skim it, and you do it the same day. No preparation needed, maybe just a mist of water. This is a theoretical situation. Like I said, you've got 5 different backgrounds. It's going to be very hard to decide how many layers of PVA you're going to put on the walls, at what strengths, which areas to deal with. Now, if you have a situation where you aren't sure, or you want to really cover your back in plastering, then what I recommend is that you use a primer, a plastering primer that's going to keep an even amount of suction throughout. And you've got these 5 different backgrounds, it's going to keep an even amount of suction, which is going to give you the maximum amount of time, and it's going to give you the certainty to know that that situation is going to be safe. Now, this is what I recommend. This is Bondit Plastering Primer. This is, in my opinion, the best primer on the market. I don't recommend Blue Grit. Blue Grit, especially if you're a beginner, is very, very heavy. It's very gritty, which means you've got to put your plaster on very thick to get over the grit. Stay away from Blue Grit. In my opinion, it's probably the worst primer on the market. It's very good at killing suction, but it's very hard to work with. And because you've got such a gritty product, like I said, you've really got to layer the plaster on thick. And for a beginner, that is really, really tough to deal with. This is very, very fine. It's got a bit of grit in the product, but generally speaking, it's very fine product, which means when you apply your plaster, you haven't got much to contend with, and it's very good at killing the suction. So all these backgrounds, they'll all be safe. They'll all set together as one. Now, this is very important. Now, if you are unsure of PVA, I've used it before, and you've had different experiences where areas going off faster than others, use this. It's a bit more expensive, I'm not going to lie, it doesn't travel as far, but this is going to give you the 100% certainty that you need to make sure that that is going to kill the suction, hold it back, and allow you to get the most use out of your plastering time. So in my opinion, avoid PVA if you're unsure, if you have multiple backgrounds like this. You literally just get the product, roll it on. Great thing about this plastering primer, it only needs one coat. Unlike PVA where you might need 2, 3, several coats, this needs one coat. You don't have to worry about concentration, you don't have to worry about mixing it. All you have to do is mix it in the tub when you get it. So literally just one coat on the wall, leave it to dry, and you'll know it's dry when you rub your fingers over it. It doesn't pull the grit off the wall. That's when you know it's fully dried and fully set. That is when you know you're safe to use the product and then start plastering. So what I recommend is that you put it on. Ideally, you can get away with 2 hours. That's what I've done before. But ideally, come back the next day and then you're 100% guaranteed that you can plaster it with a certainty, knowing that that plaster is not going to set, it's not going to crack, and it's not going to take up. So that is what I recommend if you're brand new to plastering. And actually, what I recommend if you've got multiple different backgrounds on one wall, use this and you know you're going to get the maximum amount of time needed. So that is a good lesson in terms of what we want to be doing for preparation. Now we can go on to the next stages and actually start plastering this wall. That's when we go into the 10 steps of plastering, and this is probably going to be the most important part of the course. Everything's prepped, we're ready to go.